Welcome to Killing Cancer Naturally. My name is Bilal Qizilbash. The significance of the quote right there from Gandhi is to remain humble. You are not always the smartest person in the room, and also to work together. It is so important to work together. I humbly ask that there be no audio or visual recording of this presentation. With that said, let's begin. So our breakthrough in a nutshell, we found that juiced curly kale kills melanoma cancer cells in culture, in vitro, which is pretty awesome. But it all starts with a funny story. Many years ago, I was working easily over 80 hours a week, and I was absolutely exhausted. And I would come home from work so tired, and my mother got into this new juicing kick. So she's like, "Hey, Blonde, you want to try some juice with me?" I said, "Okay, Mom, I'll try it with you." So she was making these wonderfully delicious, sweet juices with mangoes, carrots, all the stuff I've had before, really cool stuff. And I loved it. And basically 3 days in, my mom says, "Hey, Bilal, you want to try hardcore juice?" And me being a dude, I'm like, "Yeah, let's do it." So she gave me this hardcore green juice, and it was the most disgusting thing I've ever drank in my entire life. So I said, "You know what? I don't ever want to drink something like this ever again in my life." So I thought that was the end of that chapter. But something interesting happened about 3 to 4 days later when I was in the shower. So I was in the shower and I started noticing that the skin tags on my neck started decreasing in both size and number. So the significance of skin tags is they're fundamentally little benign tumors, benign meaning good. They're gene transcription errors, and basically as I was getting older, I was talking to my doctor, my friends, and basically I was told it's part of the natural part of the aging process. I'm currently 29 years old. So I was like, what did I do this past week that was different? At that time, I was much younger. I can't even remember right now how old I was. But I was eating pizza. I was having my halal burgers. I really didn't I didn't have a very good diet. So I started backtracking, and I realized the only new thing I added in my life at that time was my mom's juices. So I asked my mom, "What did you put in your juice?" She told me she put carrots, mangoes, strawberries, ginger, all these things I've had before, except for this thing called kale. So I started doing some scientific research on kale and digging through. I couldn't really find a whole lot in regards to its specific anti-cancer properties, other than its cancer preventative properties linked to the brassica vegetable, because it's related to broccoli, and everyone knows how broccoli has cancer prevention properties. So then I started going through stage 3 and stage 4 cancer patient forums. And let me tell you, don't go through them if you're depressed. And that's not a joke. Seriously, it's a very depressing place to be sometimes. But yeah, after sorting through thousands upon thousands of posts, I started noticing something interesting. A lot of people who switched to a natural lifestyle, they cut out the junk food, they drank more water, they handled chemo better. They didn't necessarily get into remission, but they handled chemo better. They were getting better. The people that actually started getting into remission, something kept popping up. They weren't specifically attributing it to kale, but kale kept popping up over and over again. So I said, okay, I wasn't going crazy. I did actually experience something there. Because like I said, skin tags are fundamentally little benign tumors. So there's so many different compounds within kale, and let me just list through some of them for you. So we have camphorol right here in the upper left-hand corner that has been shown to induce apoptosis in glioblastoma, a type of brain cancer. Then you have molecular iodine, which has been shown to induce apoptosis in human breast cancer cells while not affecting normal mononuclear cells. And also you're probably wondering, molecular iodine, how do you actually get molecular iodine? There's selenium as a cofactor in kale that functions as deiodinase. And then you have sulforaphane. Like I said, everyone's beating that dead horse because that's basically from the same family as broccoli. And I have a picture of cake here. I don't honestly like cake. I prefer pie. But cake, there's a recipe to it. So basically, you take 2 eggs, 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of sugar. Clearly, anyone in the room who's ever done any baking can tell I have not baked in my life. But there's a recipe to it. So fundamentally, if all of a sudden I took 2 eggs and I made it 10 eggs, I no longer have a cake. I now have an omelet. So however nature's doing it, there's a recipe for kale, and it seems to be centered around cell death in regards to cancerous cells. So that's where the innovation came in, and I was like, hey, let's test and see what the whole natural vegetable does. Let's check out and see what it does. And I'm going to talk less in this segment. I'm going to show you more photos because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this is what normal melanoma cells look like. This is untreated. This is treated with sonicated kale juice. So basically, we took the kale juice, we vibrated it 20,000 times per second, and then we microfiltered it through a 0.22 micron filter. And that's getting pretty close to the regular juice, so it did work pretty well, but not as well as the whole natural juice. So the juice directly from the juicer completely obliterated all the cells repeatedly. In fact, when I first saw it, I thought I was making a mistake in the lab. So let's throw some numbers at it. At time 0, we started with 200,000 cells. After about roughly 5 days of treatment, the untreated cells were roughly about 4 million, so the untreated melanoma cells. The sonicated was roughly around 629,000, and the kale treated was at 0 repeatedly. And these are the averages of multiple replicates. So blended versus juice is kind of like how people ask me about Pepsi versus Coke. They bought into a machine, so now they already sold themselves an idea. I did some experiments. So blending is different than juice. Juice is using an actual juicer, while blending is just chopping it up really finely. So in this experiment, we started off with 20,000 cells, and the untreated went to about 60,000 after 30 hours. The blended went from 20,000 to roughly about 30,000 at 30 hours, and the juice went from 20,000 down to 4,000, and within a few hours, everything was completely dead. This is just to highlight the fact that there was no observable osmotic effect, meaning that particles are greedy for water. So pesticides is a fairly big issue. How do we mitigate the pesticide risk? Well, it's actually really funny because if you start investigating how pesticides work, how they're applied, they're mostly wax-based. So one of the simplest solutions to actually deal with that is using the cheapest form of dishwashing soap possible. I use Dawn because they have the commercials where they're washing the duckies, but honestly, I've used 69-cent dishwashing soap in the past. So basically, it's just a matter of removing that outer layer to help mitigate the risk of pesticides. So in kale alone, almost everything in nature runs towards kale except for human beings. So we're talking about they have to use over 55 pesticide residues, and 6 are known to cause cancer. So this is actually a serious issue that needs to be addressed. So now, a lot of people ask me about raw versus cooked. So Bilal, when I was at Yale University, somebody asked me, hey Bilal, people have been eating kale for centuries now. Why haven't they seen that kind of results? Well, it turns out kale is a pretty tough vegetable, so people cook it extensively. But however, whatever the anti-cancer properties are in kale, it is temperature sensitive. So in this experiment at time 0, we started with roughly around 20,000 cells, and about 48 hours after treatment with the heated kale as well as the untreated, there was no statistical difference. They just continued growing. So whatever's in the kale, it must be in its raw format. However, it can be frozen. That's where this gets really interesting. So fresh is best. It's always like a rule of thumb if you can. However, you can freeze it, and we're able to push the upper limits to about 7 times, but obviously there could be some errors in the experimental model, so it could be more than that. But yeah, we were able to push the freeze-thaw cycles about 7 times. So green control, organic baby kale, and organic regular kale. The whole point of this slide is just to give you a quick breakdown that we tested quite a few things extensively. And in this particular experiment, we tested out green leaf lettuce, iceberg lettuce, organic baby kale. For prof kale, essentially professional kale is just like a locally grown organic kale, and I mix it with watermelon juice. It did the untreated as well as lettuce. So the thing is that the reason we did that is just to see if we put, for example, anything, would it induce, like I mentioned before, an osmotic effect. It did not. So basically, the melanoma cells just continued growing with the lettuce as if it wasn't even there. The organic baby kale worked sometimes it didn't. I don't know if it's a function of the juicing process itself or even the maturity of the organic baby kale. Maybe like teenagers, any of us who are teenagers or work with teenagers, sometimes some compounds are maturing, sometimes some things are not, so it's just a mixed wash. I have no idea. And also the mixed, meaning that in the mixed, it did not inhibit its ability to kill the melanoma cancer cells in vitro. These are what the different samples look like. We have lettuce, watermelon, blended, unfiltered, which is just the whole juice directly from the juicer, microfilter, sonicated, Those are both extracts organic kale as well as organic baby kale as well in the corner. So the type of juicer I used was a centrifugal juicer, Revel Icon. It rotates roughly 10,000 times per second. So it's a pretty fast juicer. And the effect on the non-cancer cells, so this is where it gets really fascinating. So in this particular experiment, at time 0, we started with roughly around 20,000 cells, and about 48 hours later, we ended up with about 24,000 cells. There was no difference between the untreated as well as the kale-treated cells. And these are non-cancerous epithelial cells. So this is pretty interesting. So we extended it a bit further out because these cells grow slower compared to the melanoma cells. And we started with roughly about 200,000 cells in this experiment, and 96 hours later of treatment, we had the untreated at 265,000, while the kale-treated was at roughly 300,000. However, again, there was no statistical difference there, but the pictures are quite fascinating, so let me show you them. This is the untreated, zoomed out. This is kale-treated, zoomed out. This is untreated, zoomed in. Kale-treated, zoomed in, 20x. Then we wanted to extend it even further out, past 13 days. So we just wanted to see what would happen. So this is the non-cancerous cells zoomed out 13 days. This is the kale-treated zoomed out after 13 days. So this is the untreated zoomed in after 13 days. This is the kale-treated zoomed in after 13 days. So how it's selectively killing the melanoma cancer cells in vitro while not affecting the normal epithelial cells, or the non-cancerous epithelial cells, or even the fibroblast cells in our more recent work, it's anyone's guess. We have honestly no idea. We've never seen anything like it before. I even have time-lapse photography, had a time-lapse video of what the kale is doing to the melanoma cancer cells, and I'll briefly walk you through some screenshots from it. I couldn't actually show you the video because the file size is over 30 gigabytes. It's huge. So all the red circles are melanoma. The green parts are kale. And this is at the time 0 mark. This is 15 hours later. All the stuff circled in red are dead. The stuff circled in yellow are dying, and the stuff being melanoma cancer cells. And this is 19 hours later. Everything is dead. In fact, actually, when you agitate the flask, everything is free-floating in suspension. This is the most scientific graph of my entire presentation. It's my desire to eat kale in regards to its taste. I'm kidding. But yeah, that's definitely an issue that we have to overcome, that people are definitely faced with, even with all of its potential benefits. It's just the flavor aspect people struggle with. Hey, some people love it. You never know. The reason I have a huge picture of canned here is because I don't want to hear about what you cannot do, what we cannot do. This is not possible, that's not possible. I want people with a can-do attitude. So if you know of anyone who's willing to work with me, hopefully to try and help make a cancer a thing of the past, I would love to hear from them. Let's work together and hopefully help ease human suffering. So in summary, juice curly kale kills melanoma cancer cells in vitro. It must be in its raw state for its anti-cancer properties. Fresh is best, can be frozen and then thawed. Kills the melanoma cancer cells, but not the non-cancerous epithelial cells in culture, as well as, like I mentioned before briefly, the fibroblast cells as well. Can potentially work on other cancers, however, much more work is needed. Some references. I just want to quickly thank my team, Dr. Brandon, Max Schwab, Matt Baer, Jacob Morgan, Alex Niswonger, as well as Matthew Titano, Embry for the government money, and all of you for listening. And now my favorite part, questions.